Hello, boys and girls. I'm going to read chapter 7 and maybe chapter 8 tonight. Chapter 7. It's on page 66. From that day forward, we spent more time away from the kennel. There was a lot of people out there who needed to be found. Sometimes they were adults and sometimes children. Sometimes they were scared. Sometimes they were confused. Or sometimes, like Marilyn, not really aware that they were lost. But most were happy to see us. Sometimes we would ride on airplanes or helicopters. You're a chopper dog, Ellie, Jacob always told me when we took off. The first time the noise made me nervous, but after that I understood that airplanes and helicopters were something like the truck. They got us to where work needed to be done. The humming that I could hear and even feel through the metal floor. Here's Ellie in the helicopter. That's kind of a neat picture. So the humming that Ellie could feel through the floor of the helicopter would make her feel drowsy after a time or two. And I'd usually doze off. When I woke up, Jacob and I would go to work. One day, Jacob took me in a truck to the biggest pond I'd ever seen. There were a lot of people there, but a man and a woman ran toward the truck when we pulled up, talking frantically before Jacob could even let me out of the cage. The woman pulled a limp purple sweatshirt from a big bag over her shoulder, and Jacob held it down for me to smell. "Can your dog really?" the woman began, sounding like she was about to cry. "I mean, we're not even sure how long it's been. I thought for sure Charlotte was playing with a few other kids down by the water. And then when I looked up, she wasn't there. They didn't even remember seeing her leave." Now the woman was crying for real, and the man put an arm around her. "Ellie's very good," Jacob said calmly. "We just need to let her do her job." "Find Ellie." I sniffed the sweatshirt deeply. Sunscreen, salt, ketchup, a smudge of ice cream, strawberry-smelling shampoo, and little girl. Now I knew who I was searching for. I put my nose down into the sand. It smelled different. I'd tracked people across the grass, dirt, sidewalks, and roads, but this was something new. Everything smelled damp and salty, and there was a strong, wet, powerful scent of seaweed in the air, threatening to swallow up the fragile smell of the little girl. And there were crisscrossing smells of people everywhere. They had been walking all over the sand, coming in and out of the water. I smelled rubber shoes and bare skin and food. So much food. Someone was grilling hot dogs. Jacob sometimes cooked those on the stove and let me have a taste. So delicious. It was hard to resist the temptation to lift my head up and take in a big breath of that lovely smell. But I kept my head down. I was working. I paced back and forth, making my way down toward the water. It was very strange water. The smell of salt from it was very strong. I thought that the fountain Jacob had jumped into was big, but it was huge. And it moved. It growled, too, as though it were angry. I would rather have stayed far away from it, but the girl's trail was leading right toward it. I had to follow. Then the water, to my surprise, swept up close to my paws. I'd been following the trail right across the sand, and all of a sudden the water rolled up to me and then back. The smell had been washed away. I jumped back in surprise. "It's okay, Ellie," Jacob said. He'd follow close behind me. "Find." This wasn't fair, the water coming up to wash the smell away. I was irritated. I set to work harder. The trail must be somewhere. I found it again in less than a minute. The little girl had been wandering close to the water's edge. The water kept moving, trying to trick me, but every time I lost the trail, I found it again. My nose stayed right down near the sand. Doggy! Doggy! A high voice said, and little hands were patting me. A tiny boy grabbed at my fur and giggled. His hands were sticky with salty water and drips from a popsicle, and ordinarily I would have licked those clean. Will he bite? Asked a woman nervously. She won't bite, but she's working, Jacob said from behind me. Could you please? But I could already tell this wasn't the child I was supposed to find, so I gently walked around him and kept going, moving quicker and quicker. Jacob was falling behind. Something round landed in the sand beside me, and I looked up, startled. Fetch! A teenage boy yelled. I nosed at the thing. It was hard and plastic and looked like it might be nice to chew, but it wasn't. It wasn't work. I kept going. The girl's smell left the water. I followed it up the sloping sand and felt it growing stronger. I looked up to see a playground with more young humans than I had ever seen running wildly around. They slid down slides and climbed up ladders, just as I had learned to do. But they didn't seem to treat it as seriously as work should be treated. They were playing and making a lot of noise doing it. The tracks of so many children crossed and crisscrossed the sand, and the smell was following. Was buried. I paced back and forth, turning in a half circle. Where had it gone? I lifted my nose and tried the air. She was close. She must be close. I'd find the smell again if I just didn't give up. And I did. There she was, sitting on a seesaw with a little boy at the other end. She flew up in the air, giggling, and then thumped down in the sand. I turned back to Jacob. Show me, he said, looking at my face. I dashed across the playground. Dog! Doggy! Can I pet your dog? Children called out as I ran. The girl thumped down in the sand, bouncing on her seat as I came up to her. Jacob followed me. Charlotte, he said. Are you Charlotte? Uh-huh. The little girl looked up and laughed. I want to play at the playground, she shouted happily. I want to stay. And then Charlotte was back with her parents. Her mother cried some more, and Charlotte cried when her parents said she had to leave the playground and go home. Jacob snapped my leash on and scratched behind my ears. Want to play in the ocean, Ellie? He asked. What do you think she'll say? He took me down to the water. He kept sneaking up and trying to get me wet. I jumped back and barked. And once I tried to bite the bubbly white water that swirled over my paws. Jacob actually chuckled a little. It was a happier sound than I had ever heard from him before. He found a stick and tossed it in the shallow water cautiously. I waded out to get it. The water sloshed around my feet and brushed against the fur on my belly, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. I felt anxious, though, worried that Jacob might go out in the water and sink in it. The thought was frightening. I snatched the stick up, tasted salt and wood, and raced back to Jacob, splashing all the way. For once, there was a real smile on Jacob's face. This is the ocean, Ellie. The ocean, he told me. And he threw more sticks until I was running in without any hesitation to get them. Dashing in and out of the waves, wet from nose to tail, I was happy. Jacob was not going to sink. He remained safely on the shore, grinning. I felt that thing that had such a tight clench on Jacob's heart loosen just a little as we played. Oh, that was a nice chapter. Chapter 8. Gypsy was not at the kennel the next day, but Cammy was. I tried to get him interested in a glorious game of I've got the ball, and you don't. But he just lay with his head on his paws, watching me tolerantly. Then Jacob came out into the yard. Ellie, he called. I'd never heard such urgency in his voice. I dropped the ball at once and ran to the gate so that he could let me out. We were obviously going to work, and work sounded more important than ever. Jacob hurried with me to the truck, and we drove. The tires made screeching sounds that I could hear above the wail of the siren when we turned the corners. I had to lie down flat, my claws digging into the floor of the cage to keep from sliding around. When the truck jerked to a stop, I could see people gathered in a parking lot. That wasn't unusual. People often came to watch Jacob and me work. But these people were more worried than I'd ever seen. One of them, a woman, was so afraid that she couldn't stand up, and two people were holding her. Anxiety was rippling off Jacob so strong that it made the fur on my back stand up. Jacob left me in my cage and ran past me to talk to the people. I waited, whining a little, very softly. Something was wrong, very wrong. The only way to make it better was to go to work right away. We were in a parking lot next to the big building with glass doors. The frightened woman reached into a bag and took out a soft, floppy toy. It had long ears like a rabbit, and most of the fur had been rubbed off. We've got the mall locked down, someone said. Jacob came to the door of my cage and opened it. He handed me the floppy rabbit to sniff. Ellie, okay? Get it? I need you to find Ellie. Another little girl like Charlotte, but different. She had her own smell, of course. All humans did. This one combined sweat and dirt and peanut butter and salt, soap that smelled like honey, cookie crumbs. I leaped out onto the hard black ground and tried to sort out all the smells around me. The ground itself smelled bitter and somehow black, just like it looked. Many feet had crossed it. There was a foul-smelling puddle of oil and a sharp stink of gasoline. Someone had spilled a cup of coffee. I moved away from all those smells, concentrating. I was looking for a little girl. I didn't notice that I'd moved out in front of a moving car until the driver hit the brakes with a squeal. Hey, what the? I heard the angry voice say. Behind me, Jacob held up something in his hand. Police dog, he said sharply. Back your vehicle up. Okay, sorry, the driver mumbled. But I wasn't paying attention to that. The car wasn't important. I'd found the track of the girl who'd held the little rabbit, a soft rabbit. But her scent was mixed with another unfamiliar one. Strong, adult, male. I tracked them both, moving quickly, sure of myself. She's got it, I heard Jacob call. And then the smell vanished right where a car sat in that parking lot. The two people I'd been following had gone. They must have driven away in a different car, and then this one had pulled in to take its place. I turned back to show Jacob, but he wasn't happy. I could tell. Frustration and disappointment rose off of him like a cloud. I cringed a little. Hadn't I done the work right? He'd always been happy before. Okay, good girl, Ellie. Good dog. He pulled a rubber ring out of his pocket. But he played with me for only a minute or two, and I could tell he was thinking about something else. Jacob had called me a good dog, but I didn't feel like one. He wasn't happy. The work wasn't right, or maybe it wasn't done. We've tracked her To here, Jacob told a man in a suit. It looks like she got into a vehicle and left. Do we have surveillance on the parking lot? We're checking now. If it is who we think it is, though, the car's stolen, the man answered. Where would they take her? If it's him, where would he go? Jacob asked. The man in the suit turned his head, squinting at the green hills we could see in the distance. Topanga Canyon or Will Rogers State Park. We'll head up that way, Jacob said. See if we can pack up something. I was startled when Jacob put me in the front seat of the truck. He'd never let me be a front seat dog before. But he wasn't doing it because he was in a good mood, I could tell. He was still tense, so I stayed focused as he started up the car. We passed another car with two terriers in the back seat of a station wagon, and they yipped at me out of pure jealousy because I was in the front seat and they weren't. I ignored them. Jacob and I drove out of the parking lot, and he held the soft, stuffed rabbit out to me. I sniffed it obediently, but I was confused. Hadn't I already done this? Didn't I do it right? Okay, girl, Jacob said. I know this is going to sound strange, but I want you to find. I turned and stared at him in bewilderment. Find? In the truck? Jacob drove slowly, quickly glancing at me and then returning his eyes to the road. I'd been told to find, but I didn't know how. I couldn't put my nose to the ground and hunt for the little girl's smell on that soft rabbit, but I could. I lifted my nose out the window. Smells were rushing past so quickly it was hard to sort them out. Good girl, Jacob praised. Find the girl. My nose was still filled with the smell of the girl from the toy. And then a breeze brought me that same smell from outside the window, still entwined with the man's. I looked over at Jacob. Good girl, he said, stepping hard on the brakes. Behind us, cars honked. Got it, girl? He asked intently, but the smell had gone. That's okay, Ellie. Good girl, Jacob said, and let the truck ease forward. I understood now. We were working from inside the truck. Instead of my legs moving over the ground, hunting a smell, the truck was doing the moving for me. I put my nose back to the window. Hot asphalt, fumes, from the other cars, a whiff of something disgusting and delicious from an overflowing trash can, a greasy and salty smell of fried chicken from a restaurant, but none of those was right. I was straining, rejecting any and everything except from the smell from that toy. I felt the truck tilt as we headed uphill. Disappointment was rising from Jacob. I could feel it. I think we've lost her, he muttered. Nothing, Ellie? At my name, I turned and looked at him, and then I went back to my work. The smells were changing. A sharp, tangy smell from the pine trees. Warm earth. Dry grass. But no little girl. Not the one I was supposed to find. Unit 8, Kilo 6, what's your 20? The radio squawked. 8 Kilo 6, we are proceeding up Amalfi. Any luck? We had something on Sunset. Nothing since. Roger that. I barked. I didn't normally bark when I caught a scent, but we were working from a truck, and Jacob was so worried. None of this was normal. When the smell rushed in through Jacob's window, filling up the cab of the truck, I couldn't hold back. My tail thumped against the seat. This was it. I'd found the smell again. The girls and the man's together. The truck slowed. I kept my nose pointed into the smell. Jacob eased to a stop. Okay, which way? Here, Ellie? He asked. I climbed across the seat and into his lap, shoving my face out of his window. Left on Capri, Jacob shouted, his voice sharp with excitement. A few minutes later, the truck started to bump. We're on the fire road, Jacob yelled. I was alert, focused, dead ahead. When Jacob wrestled with the truck, trying to keep it on the narrow road, he pushed me back into the other seat, away from the smell. I whined a little in frustration. Sorry, girl. I have to drive, Jacob muttered. Hold on, just hold on. Suddenly the truck thumped to a stop, facing a yellow gate. Be advised, we need the fire department up here, Jacob said urgently. There's a gate. 10-4, crackled the voice from the radio. Jacob pushed his door open hard, and we both jumped out. A red car was parked to one side of the rough dirt road, and I ran over to it. My ears were up. My nose was straining. Everything in me was on alert. Jacob had his gun out. We've got a red Toyota Camry, empty. Ellie says it belongs to the man, Jacob said shortly. And then he led me around to the back of the car, watching me closely. No indication anyone is in the trunk of the car, he said. Roger that, said the radio voice. The smell from the car wasn't as strong as what it was coming from the breeze. Below us, through the trees, was a canyon. That was where we should go. That was where the girl was, the girl who needed to be found. A steep road on the other side of the yellow gate held the man's smell. His was stronger, smudged into the dust of the road. Hers was more delicate, drifting on the air. He'd carried her. Be advised, subject took the road down to the canopy, Jacob said. He's on foot. 8 kilo 6. Hold and wait for backup. Jacob didn't seem to be paying any attention to the voice as it came out of his walkie-talkie. Ellie, he said to me, putting his gun back on his belt, let's go find the girl.